Maria, the chaps, they're all in beautiful Caribbean islands, and we are in a slightly overcast London suburb. So
yeah, I mean it's hot, it's warm though. I mean it's going to be raining tomorrow, but we got warm today.
Yeah, we're just going to actually the guys should just take a picture of where they are and send it to us, and we can just use it as our backdrop. How about that? You know. So hello to everyone. Hi JC, how are you?
Doing well, and thank you both for taking the initiative and putting this together. It's definitely appreciated.
We're very excited to get this discussion going, and as we were saying in the pre-interview, just to start changing things up, getting the flow of ideas moving, and to really get people rethinking and rediscovering the Caribbean region. How are you, Ralph? How are you today? You have a lovely background there, I can see.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Hello to everybody from Anguilla. We're here in the British island and British territory of Anguilla. And you can see my background. It's a picture of our famous Shoal Bay East beach, which is ranked #1 in the world in some categories. So happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us.
It's inspiring me. It's making me feel, I'm sure it makes a lot of people feel very happy on a cloudy day. So thank you for your participation and your beautiful background. It's great. And hi to Mr. Seth Andre with the gorgeous palm trees and what's that fish at the back? It looks like a flying fish and a leaning Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, that is actually a mini marlin, believe it or not, a very small version.
Is it a real one or is it?
No, it's just a model of a marlin.
Great.
They're apparently about 600 pounds, the big ones, so it's a very small version.
Oh wow! How are you in Barbados? How is everything in Barbados?
Yeah, everything's great. We're back to work in full flow here now. So yeah, we're out of the quarantine and things are getting back to normality.
That's fine. We will be following you. Maria and I is still in London and we won't have anything opened up until the 15th. But I think people are just fed up. They're just going out and doing what they want because I think it's getting warm and we just need to be out in the forest and, you know, meeting people. So at some point we'll be back up to full speed. Maria, how are you? How's everything going with you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's get things started. So I'm going to hand over to JC just to tell our audience who you are, what you do, and then I'll go to Ralph and Seth to do a brief introduction about your business, your company, and how you came to be.
Well, thank you very much. In a nutshell, I'm a horticultural engineer by trade. And what that means is I'm engaged in problem solving in the field of food production. I'm trying to find simplest, most effective, most profitable, most sustainable solutions to people's issues in producing food and empower them through plants.
Brilliant. And whereabouts are you based? Are you based in the US? I believe when we spoke a few times before, you said you were going to do the big leap like I am to the tropicals, to the tropics in the Caribbean.
I'm currently in the U.S. in the natural state of Arkansas, middle of the U.S., middle of nowhere. It's beautiful too. But I'm hoping to get to where Ralph is as soon as they allow that.
Yes, and I will be relocated to where Seth is in Barbados. So at some point, we'll definitely be meeting in person, right?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And could you just tell us the name of your company so that we know?
Yeah, almost 3 years ago to date, I founded Cultivation Bioengineering, and I believe it has a very descriptive name. We bioengineer solutions in the world of cultivation.
It just flies off the tongue.
Well, CultiBio for short. Got to have a brand.
Of course, of course.
It's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. And thank you so much. And Ralph, tell us a bit about yourself, your company, and why you're in Anguilla.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm a Canadian by nationality, Dutch Canadian actually. So I've got some genetics in farming. Big family in the Netherlands, but I have been working in the Caribbean now for over 20 years, doing various aspects of bringing investment down to this region, both the Caribbean and Latin America. And I've been living down here for the last 10 years. I've had the opportunity to live on several different islands, and have been here in Anguilla for the last 3 years. So we founded Alchemy Renewables in 2016, and our company focuses on two primary areas, one being renewable energy at the utility scale. We're primarily involved in solar and geothermal projects. And then more recently, we've had an increased focus on agriculture, protected agriculture, particularly greenhouse farming. And we're working across the region from Bermuda down to Trinidad and even into Guyana now. So we're very much involved in looking at the region holistically in terms of increasing food production and doing it in a climate smart way through new technologies, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later.
And we'll definitely get into the bones of that and start to unpick it, because it seems to me and Maria, this is a really new area for us. So we'll be learning as we do the conversation. And I think it's a really important subject because I think the audience will find this fascinating. So we'll definitely start to unpick that in our discussion. And Mrs. Seth Andre, you've been a guest on our expertise library already, talking about construction and development around the Caribbean, but particularly in Barbados. But just refresh everyone's memory about who you are and what you do and why Barbados.
Yeah, well, I'm a quantity surveyor by trade, and I've been working in the construction field, which was originally, main contracting in London, and been in Barbados for 15 years now. So I had started up Caribbean Surveying Group. That was 6 years ago, mostly working in the Eastern Caribbean. So we've done some jobs in St. Vincent, Dominica, St. Lucia, different islands, British Virgin Islands, but predominantly at the moment, we're really just working in Barbados. And it's general construction we deal with, so a lot of residential, commercial, and we have also worked on a number of agricultural projects. Which is why I'm so interested to work with the other chaps we're talking with today,
Yeah, brilliant. I think I can see some collaborations going forward in the future. Also, me documenting it as well, because I'm fascinated by this area. So with that being said, thank you so much. And obviously, we'll start to find out a lot more about what you all do in the discussion. I will hand over the baton to Maria, because we've got some opening questions, and then obviously the conversation will flow. So Maria, over to you, my dear.
Okay, so just remember to unmute myself. So it was really just, why the Caribbean? Why is it start with the Caribbean, or the Caribbean in the first place?
Well, let me maybe I could just start providing some context.
Yeah.
The Caribbean region as a whole is a population of about 35 million people, and we get about 35 million visitors every year tourism being the sort of main driver, economic driver down here. In all, the food imports into the region are now in the area of $6 billion US a year. So all packaged food, dairies, meats, and fresh produce is more or less imported almost exclusively. I think the number is about 80% of the region's food demand is currently imported. So heavily dependent, and that's always been the case for the last few decades at least. And more recently with the pandemic issues have put all of this in additional focus. But you know, because of the dependency on the tourism industry and the eating habits of tourists, you know, the region as a whole has a very difficult time growing enough food for itself. Some of the larger islands like Jamaica and Trinidad, Guyana as a country are producing fairly significant amounts of food. But other islands like here in Anguilla or British Virgin Islands are probably importing about 95% of their food requirements. So it's become an issue. And while traditional farming, soil-based farming has been heavily supported to try to get local farmers to grow more, you know, we're looking at this now in terms of bringing new technologies in protected agriculture and greenhouse farming, which again is not new here, but the problem has been we have a lot of weather threats here, including hurricanes, which the season just started 2 days ago. And a lot of these greenhouse farms have been destroyed. So we have focused on this issue particularly and developed an engineered solution to greenhouse farming, where we've basically engineered the first Category 5 hurricane-resistant greenhouse in the world.
Fantastic. Maria?
So I just wanted to go back to, there was another question that I wanted to ask. It was about, why do you think they import so much food? Is it just because of the tourism industry?
Or is it the eating habits of the Caribbeans as well? Is that something to be questioned?
It goes to the geology of the islands, and I'm going to let JC answer this a little bit more, but you know, there's very little arable land. These are you know, islands that are volcanic, so that in some islands are very have, you know, very high mountain ranges and very little arable land between those mountains. And other islands like Anguilla are coral-based islands, so they're literally just all rock. There's really very little soil to grow in, and the soil that we do have is extremely poor quality. But JC, maybe you can expand on the, you know, from a horticultural point of view.
Basically, what Ralph is alluding to is the extreme diversity in the Caribbean. And that's something that we're taking very, very seriously, and why we will have success in our mission. Each island is a unique case. They have a different history, different topography, different climates, different situations. Some are in the path of hurricanes, some are not. Some have the environment for extensive agriculture, some do not. So we basically take all of this into account when we decide how we're going to grow and what we're going to grow and at what scale, basically. So there are some islands, like he mentioned, Jamaica and Trinidad, have significant agriculture. In a perfect world with no tourists, let's say, they could sustain themselves on a lot of indigenous crops that are fairly low input and that have a lot of success. When it comes to the foreigners, their own dietary preferences and the influence they have on the local culture, we're talking about crops that have a very hard time growing there normally. And so we want to overcome those challenges of high heat, extreme light, extreme wind, pests and pathogens and things like that. And you want to do it sensibly without just dumping in inputs. I have a mentor who grew in Roatan, Honduras for a couple decades, and using a very weak greenhouse that was damaged multiple times by storm events, and an inappropriate system, one of the world's leading hydroponic systems, that again, just didn't do them any favors and required them to, this is his quote, they would dump ice from the resort freezer into their tank, which number one is extremely wasteful, number two is not very precise, just to get by. And so the precedents that we have make us understand that this is possible, but we also know that it can be improved. So that's our goal, is to just basically tackle the crops that are hardest to grow, that are in the highest demand with the highest value, so that these things do not need to be imported. They arrive inconsistently, they arrive after most of their shelf life is depleted, and it's just unnecessary. So it doesn't contribute to jobs locally, it doesn't contribute to income locally, and that can be a big portion of remediating the import-export balance, basically, and increasing GDP for these small countries where it really counts.
That kind of strikes a chord with me because my parents are Caribbean, and they're baby boomers, so they're in their mid-70s. And from my experience of having parents from the Caribbean and known other Caribbean folk based in the UK, they are so innately and emotionally attached to the land, you know, how they grew up. I do actually come from a family of farmers that had their own farm and would sell their produce at market. And it's actually kind of moved down a generation to my mother. She literally has green fingers. Anything she touches grows. So it's so strange for me to hear this about the Caribbean, because from my introduction of the Caribbean, it's always been a land that's plentiful. I mean, my grandparents and great-grandparents were growing coca and yam and rearing pigs and chickens and selling it. And so has there been is it because of tourism, is that a great change in the way that people understand the Caribbean? Has that contributed to people not being so connected to the land, or are they still connected, but it's difficult to produce food?
Tourism has a significant impact, basically, and you're right. The land is plentiful, it's very fertile, people are very connected to their plants, but foreign influences and demands change things. So aside from, some of these islands get 10 times more tourists than they have local population. So most of the food eaten there, by far, is foreigners, not locals. And in addition, as Ralph can tell you as well, there are certain crops that the Caribbean is in the habit of exporting in bulk.
Right.
And climate challenges are starting to make that a little bit difficult, like famous Jamaican Scotch bonnet peppers. They go into beautiful jerk sauces. Everyone around the world wants these. So they have to continuously increase their production. And that's actually damaging to the beautiful lands that we're talking about. It's not small scale farming anymore. So we can help them transition that also into just more of a factory style. The plants they want, pesticide free, and just kind of physically eliminate all of the threats from the environment.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Ralph?
Yeah, Natasha, to your point, everybody farms here in the Caribbean, like your family does. Everybody is very self-sufficient and resourceful, and they all have backyard farms, and they grow what little food that they need for themselves, right? We're now talking about commercial volumes of food that, a single supermarket here could import over 1 million pounds of fresh produce a year to fill their shelves. So, and JC just touched on it, a lot of the indigenous crops grow quite well here, and, tropical fruits, and I'm a huge fan of those. I have them here in my yard. I have pawpaw, and I have coconut, and I have soursop. Wonderful foods that grow fairly naturally here in this climate and grow well. You mentioned some root crops like sweet potato and cassava and other sort of high carbohydrate crops do grow very well. It's the cold weather crops, the greens, the lettuces, tomatoes, and certainly berry fruits and things like that. They're just not able to be grown very effectively here in the Caribbean because of the multiple, threats that occur, and primarily the climate's just too hot.
Yeah.
So those are what we call cold weather crops, and those are primarily what are imported. So we're trying to fill the gaps with the local farmers who do an amazing job in many cases to grow what they can grow on their land, but we still are importing 80% of the fresh produce. So we're trying to fill that gap and eliminate that gap, and ultimately work with all the local farmers to create food security for every island and reduce that import dependency.
Yeah, no, I wanted to bring it in, Seth, because we were talking in the pre-interview about water. You said in Barbados, have they got a system about water? Because water is a very precious resource in the Caribbean. I know that much, living in the Middle East for a few years, and they import almost all of their food in the Middle East. I was in Bahrain and land is practically barren. So you're going into a supermarket and you're spending like 10 or 20 pounds for a melon, which I'm not sure how much that's going to be in dollars, probably like $30, something like that, for a cantaloupe melon, because they have to import everything, and strawberries. But could I just go to Seth about water? What's the water situation, especially in your island, Barbados?
Well, I mean, as with a lot of the Caribbean, we have infrastructure issues. And part of that here is the age of the water mains, which they are, they're estimating it could be over $1 billion to make the necessary repairs. So we currently have a lot of water loss, and we're relying on huge electric bills to pump the water. Part of the planning permission situation here means that most people are required to build water tanks in their homes. So we do have a backup system. Doesn't necessarily mean people have a filter and a pump in their house to actually use it. But it is a good resource that's available in, you know, the event that there is water shortages, which we do regularly have here. And I believe a lot of the islands do have that situation. Obviously, for large-scale agriculture, it's a whole different system. I mean, in Barbados, predominantly most of the agriculture here is still cane, although it's not really a good economical resource now for the island, because we actually import cane from other countries like Colombia simply because it's cheaper, right? Oh. So it really does make sense that, you know, the agriculture modernizes and starts providing more useful resources, and water is a huge part of that. And that's why, you know, the system that Ralph uses really, it's much more economical. There's no water loss, so that is a very significant factor that needs to be looked at.